Hey guys, welcome back to Grizzly Valley. Today I'll be working on a Roman restaurant, and that's also the reason why it's not as long of an episode as the past ones, basically because I built this restaurant and a couple of areas around it as well, and basically finished this general area which I still had between the Alpine and the Roman part of the park, and that just really felt like a good way to end the episode, at least in a coherent way, and not make the entire episode too messy. Like I have said in previous episodes, I'm not sure if I'll really be able to keep these videos like very thematic, working on a single thing in a single episode, as I do really like to do, because there are those smaller things all around the park, like some smaller unfinished things that I still need to get to, and I will get to in some future episodes after this one. But yeah, that is basically about all of the planning that I have at the moment. For this restaurant itself, it is very heavily inspired by the Roman villas. I really just wanted to get that style in there. Like, I'm really playing with a couple of different styles of Roman architecture, and at least getting all of the general ideas of Roman buildings in here. So I have the very temple style buildings for these stations, the very city-esque buildings on the other side of the same area, and I wanted to try some more rural villa-like style for this restaurant to be able to actually get that style in as well, and play around a bit with that too. It's definitely not as interesting of a style gameplay wise, since I want to keep it a lot more clean. Like, I've played a lot with different objects and different uses and very intricate details with the previous styles, but the Roman villas are pretty much no nonsense, pretty simple, white walls with red roofs, and the only real special thing that they have going for them, which makes them quite a bit more recognizable and is probably also the most recognizable aspect of this building, is having that little gallery in front of the building where the roofs kind of hang over the gallery, and you have some pillars and just a small path that goes underneath that roof, and that's really the only thing I really wanted to have here. But aside from that, it's actually just a grey box which is meant to look like a Roman villa from the front, and I'll just be housing a simple restaurant in here. It's not the best placing for a restaurant, but it's right about the only thing which I figured I could fit into this tight space here without leaving too much open, and also without making the building too large and not having a proper border or transition between the Alpine area, the main streets, and the Roman area which I have over here. So that's basically the sort of idea that went into the building, but it's more or less filler of the area in a sense that it is definitely not a weenie. So it's not really meant to really draw attention to it, but just to fill up the area a bit more and get an atmosphere going in the area. Have a restaurant, because that's, from a, well, park realism aspect, still handy in any case. And also have, like, some way, and I was kind of struggling with how I was going to lay out this area. And Fluxtrons actually talked about this in his last video, Siege video too. How very often you build things and you're very insecure about what it's going to be like while you're building it. And I really felt that way during this especially, but I very often do feel that way. It's also very discouraging quite often. Like, I lay off playing the game very often just because I feel like I'm not actually going somewhere with what I'm building, even if I am actually going in a pretty good and steady way. And that's really how I felt in this area, because I had all those paths going off on a slope there with the future rockwork, and I wasn't really sure how to fill in this area to actually make it come together. Like, I felt a wall of buildings over here would just not fit with having the rocks on the other side. Like, it would be too striking of a contrast between the very urban looking facades and the very just natural rocks and foliage, where I couldn't really build any buildings or place flat rides just because it doesn't really work well with the terrain. So I was really hoping that this restaurant could somehow make this area look a lot better in the end with the pathways in front of it, and I'm actually quite happy with how it turned out, but it's definitely not too spectacular on its own, just something that I really needed to get in here as a way to make this entire area just finished as a whole, and something that I also kind of just needed to get myself encouraged a bit again, because I was incredibly insecure about how this was going to look. And I know that I very often just stop building things when I get to that point that I'm not sure where I'm going with something, and I don't really like the look of things as it's just halfway finished. And I really have to say, it's sometimes it's best to push yourself and just say, well, that you should just work on something, even if you have no real idea as to what you really want to do, because as soon as you get to just filling in the area and adding the last details, especially when it comes to foliage, which makes a really, really big difference, things can very often just start looking a lot better than they were looking when you're halfway through the building process. And the same goes for the park as a whole, really. One of the reasons why I want to focus the future couple of episodes on some smaller things and not so much the thematic episodes of building one thing at a time, preferably weenies, is because there are just those unfinished parts of the park with just empty grasslands and it doesn't really come together well, and I really want to start filling in those areas to get a better idea of what the park as a whole is going to look like and flow like layout wise. So that's why I want to focus a bit more on that as well. There's also the reason that obviously there's still almost 1 month to go until the second alpha release, but I have to say I do feel like we're really about to run out of options really with the current build. There are definitely still many ideas and many themes that I see people try, and really some amazing work, but like I really feel we're, well, reaching the limit in a sense here. Not in a sense that we can't really come up with new themes with the current pieces, it's definitely possible, but you can't use any different textures, and you start getting this effect that every park eventually ends up looking very similar, at least in this current build of the alpha, because even if you go for different themes and make different buildings and compose things in a completely different way, we are stuck with the current textures, and there's not much that you can sort of do outside of the things that have been done, because at this point in time nearly everybody has built buildings using nearly all of the pieces that we even have at the moment. So it's sort of like we're running out of juice here, and I definitely don't want to say I'll give up on this park, that's definitely not the case, but I feel like it isn't really worth it so much to just keep experimenting as much as I went into this park with. Like the first number of episodes we just try different themes and see what we can do with all the pieces in this game, but at this point we've sort of come up with a lot of uses for the pieces already, and I've gotten a lot more experience with things as well, and it doesn't feel as experimental and as much anymore, and I just want to focus more on making the park itself come together. So I guess it's best described as a very short summary as that I don't want to focus as much on the individual buildings anymore, but from now on also a bit more on how the park itself is going to look, and at least connect it in such a way that Grizzly Valley can be a realistic park, or at least somewhat realistic as much as I can get, and not just a collection of interesting buildings and interesting themes, but with no real connection or any coherence in the park as a whole. So yeah, that's basically that. And yeah, for the restaurant itself, it's really a simple restaurant. The most prominent thing really on the building is that little gallery on the bottom. I did want to have a slightly raised part just behind this lower gallery, just to have a little bit more depth to the building than it would have with just one level. And it's also a kind of design that's very typical and standard almost, I would say, for a Roman villa like this. But yeah, that's basically the entire idea behind the building. I wanted to keep it quite clean, so no unnecessary details really, because that would just feel like overdoing the building, and it just feels like it's better being a little bit simplistic sometimes, which I would reckon sometimes buildings are just left better simplistic, especially when you go into modern things, and it all comes down to shape, of course, but definitely for buildings like these as well. I didn't want to overly decorate it, also theme-wise, since it's a villa, but still it can't really be that expensive to build realism-wise. So yeah, that was the idea for that. I wanted to have a small pillar over here just because I felt I could have rockwork over here, and this was really that space where I felt I had like no other options than to just decorate it in a sense. The space is too small to add a flat ride, and there are the sloped pathways over here, it's nearly impossible to really add a building here, and I also wanted to keep it quite open so you would be able to see the arch from the coaster area, but also the other way around, just so you can see the Roman area parts from the other parts within the area. Just keep it more like one area and not close off certain parts of the area too much from the other parts. So I wanted to keep it quite open, not have any buildings or flat rides, but I did want to have something and not just have rocks or turn it into a forest. And I really would have loved to turn this into a small grassy hill, but there is no way I can realistically do so. So I figured just a couple of rockwork hills over here will have to do, because I need to somehow get some terraforming in. And to make it not seem so much like just a barren, completely natural sort of rockwork facade, I tried to at least put that pillar in there. Make it a bit more like kind of the rockwork that you have around the Forum Romanum in a sense as well. And just have that bit of decoration in there. And do the same with the foliage really. Instead of just having some standard foliage and clog it up with a lot of trees, I wanted to also keep the foliage very open and also very man-made, very planted in quite a systematic way. So with a couple of small palm trees just placed in a straight line, and some cypresses placed in a straight line, which is fairly typical of Italian landscapes as well, and just dress it up that way and hope that it would somehow become something that I would like. And after that, I really wanted to go to the foliage over here in this area, which is quite important for a number of reasons. It's pretty good against the as a backdrop for the Italian restaurant, so you don't just have this enormous wall of, well, white walls and light roofs over there, but actually have some nice vibrant foliage behind the building, just a little bit higher than the building itself to actually make it stand out from its surroundings in a sense, and also to act as a border between these areas, which was a very narrow border, so I had to make it quite a dense little patch of foliage over there. But it's something that I really needed to get in there to get rid of the pretty big white wall of the Italian part, and also to make sure that you wouldn't be able to see the Italian building from the Alpine area and vice versa. The only building that you will be able to see from the Italian area is going to be the castle on top of the mountain, but there isn't much that I can do about that, and it's almost in a Disneyland kind of way, really. And the very dense foliage around here was also quite helpful, because it makes the coaster a bit more like it actually interacts with the environment. It was a pretty still part of the coaster with just a couple of helixes, some airtime hills, and aside from just being next to a path, it doesn't really do much, and the path doesn't have much going for it either. So I just wanted to add some dense foliage over there, so you kind of still have that idea with the roller coaster that you're really flying through the trees, if it were, especially given how the coaster is really made up of two parts, where one part is like it only interacts with the mountain and it really goes in and over this mountain area, and in the second part it really sweeps throughout the park. So I sort of wanted to at least keep some interaction with many of the things in the park, so you really have this idea that you're just flying through the forests and over the paths over here, and keep that quite close together really, to not make it like just a coaster in the middle of a forest that doesn't really interact with anything else, but at least keep some overlapping elements there. And just as a final little touch for this entrance to the area, actually make the aqueduct a little bit larger, so you actually have the aqueduct effect over here as well, and it's almost like it's split in two, because there is that pretty dense foliage in between it, which I do kind of like, because it doesn't really seem like a huge wall because of it. And then over here with the plaza, with the triumphal arch, there was one thing I wanted to try as a last idea. I didn't want to have buildings all around the sides of this, because it would just be quite unmanageable and also feel unnecessary and expensive for this type of park. Not to mention that there's hardly any space for it, so just to make it seem a little bit more urban and also get some Colosseum-ish vibes from it as well, I figured I might as well put a round archway, or a bunch of arches in a round sort of setup around that. But that's something I'll also have to finish and see how it's gonna look at some later stage. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this episode, and peace.